On today's show, we have Aram Layton of Just Baseball talking all things Rangers prospects and Rangers rookies. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers, the first and best daily Rangers podcast. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Ranger fan covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Joining me today is the man, the myth, the legend, Aram Layton, prospect, writer, head baseball prospect, analyst. What is your official title at Just Baseball over there, my guy?
I'd say co-founder, but yeah, I kind of Javi jokes. He like pulls out Javi Reyes of the host the Locked On Padres. Will put like a whole list and just make up different titles for me. But prospects are my bread and butter. Like that's the thing that I think have kind of generated a little bit of just some following for, but Just Baseball, that's my baby, and co-founder of that, and really proud of what we've built on Major League Baseball side and coverage side. And so I'm excited. We're going to talk big league side of things with the Rangers too, and looking forward to getting into that too.
Always glad to have you on, and former host of Locked On MLB Prospects and Locked On Marlins, but here talking Just Baseball with Aram Layton. Before we get into today's show, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Your customers can place a $5 bet. You can start with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, the Rangers had don't even get me started on the 7th place finisher in AL Rookie of the Year in Mr. Wyatt Langford, a guy with all the hype in the world, just breezing his way through the minor league system, showing I have nothing more to learn here. Get me to the big leagues right freaking now, and get them to the big leagues right freaking now. The Rangers did, and he struggled early and struggled often, and then towards the end of the season, we really started to see the Wyatt Langford that we saw in spring training, winning AL Rookie of the Year and Player of the Month in September, posting a near 1,000 OPS in that month. And I'm curious what you make of Wyatt Langford's rookie season. Are you at all worried about the struggles, or is it just kind of a byproduct of this is just kind of how it works these days?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, man. This sport is tough, and you watch so many guys really get up there and get their doors blown off. And we're talking top prospects and things like that. And, I think what was interesting is you kind of had Chourio was almost in his own realm to a degree, but you had Langford and Chourio kind of mirroring each other in each league, where you could see the snippets in the first half of the season, and, you could see what can be. And they were surviving. It wasn't, the Jackson Holiday level of, getting dismantled, but, relative to the expectations, you wanted to see a little bit more. And then they kind of hit that 250 plate appearance mark, 200 plate appearance mark, and start to settle in a little bit, understand, the difference and how pitchers are going to attack you there and the preparation, and just saw them turn into the players that, I think you can really expect them to be moving forward. Chourio was absolutely unbelievable. But, even what you saw from Wyatt Langford down the stretch, final 50 games, OPS north of 800, and you mentioned just like it got better and better and better. I'm sure he was, it's a long season, but I'm sure he was in a position where he probably wanted it to keep going, because clearly something clicked around that August time. And, it's really hard. And I think it's important to note too, like, Langford was not the most highly regarded high school guy. Like in college, was initially a catcher, and then it doesn't play as a freshman, then endears himself and breaks out and bursts onto the scene. So like in terms of just reps against high level competition, like this guy made up for, I think, what you rarely see in terms of just being as good as he was against AA competition, AAA, and getting to the big leagues. But like, even in big SEC play, things like that, like he was so good for how limited his experience was. A lot of these guys are in the summer circuit playing in All-American games consistently and all these things. Like, I think it is important to note, like, this was a lot of ABs for him. And if you compare it to, the 2 years prior, like he got more ABs in this season than really he's been able to get in multiple years as an amateur and a minor leaguer. So I think there was an opportunity to learn in this season alone more than maybe he had in the last several seasons. And that's why I feel great about where he's heading going into 2025.
I am so excited for his future. It was kind of wild just seeing how incredible he was in spring training, and how I remember there were like rumors and rumblings that, Rangers GM Chris Young at the time, now POBO, brushed off during the World Series when Adolis Garcia went down with an injury. I was thinking, I'm like, they should call up Wyatt Langford. They should do it. It's insane, but I think he could do it. And they're like, no, we were never thinking about that. And then in a Jeff Passan feature in the spring, they're like, actually, no, they were most definitely thinking about that. But one of the things we were thinking about Wyatt Langford is that it'd take a while for his defense to take root. And I remember reading on Fangraphs, a very lovely website, very good in general prospect analysis, but something that
Absolutely.
they wrote there made me turn my head of a 30 grade current and future defense on Wyatt Langford, where, at the beginning of the season, it's like, oh boy, this guy cannot play the outfield. He's very athletic, but it didn't take long for him to figure out how to play at least a passable to, at the end of the season, pretty good left field. And now I feel pretty decent about him as maybe even an everyday center fielder. I'm curious what your thoughts are on his defense.
Yeah, it ties back into that initial conversation, right? Of repetition and opportunities where, I mean, a lot of guys that are as fast as he is and athletic as he is have had a lot more reads off the bat in the outfield. And remember, this is a guy that was catching, going into his collegiate career and then didn't get a lot of reps as a freshman. So I think that is a very important note in this whole thing. And I generally stray from limiting guys in terms of their upside outfield wise when they have that kind of athleticism. There's guys that very clearly just struggle actions wise and movement wise. And you just say, okay, it just might not be in the cards for them. Langford, of course, had the closing speed, but there were times where you'd see the comfort tracking the ball. And then, there was other times where it just seemed like he wasn't used to those kind of reads off the bat. It comes off the bat different, obviously, in the big leagues as well, where I started to see the progress in the minor leagues. And then I think the game just got a little fast for him in the show. And, very common young hitters, like, you're struggling a little bit. You're out there in the field. You're thinking about that AB a little bit. Maybe you're not as locked in, to get those jumps and be in a position where you want to be. I mean, these outfielders nowadays, the most elite are playing the infield out there, really. Like, they're 1-2 down, like they're in their legs, they're ready to go, and they're in the similar position to how you're going to see those infielders. So when we put out that our scouting report on him, I had him at like a 35 to 40 present, but with a 50 future. And I think he can get by into, and I think that's a lot to ask of him as he's getting finally comfortable on these pull side reads. But I definitely think he can be an average, at least, defender in a corner with the closing speed and, with the gains that he has made, and just too athletic overall. And I think it's important to note, again, the lack of reps.
Yeah, those reps definitely got to him. And the struggles early on, I think, really got to him. All of it, of just those first 6 weeks or so in the big leagues. He ended up having a hamstring injury that sidelined him for a couple of weeks. And then after that reset, came back at the end of May, won AL Rookie of the Month in June. Had, really started hitting for power. That was kind of the first time all season he was really hitting for power, but he's starting to put things together. And looking at this rookie class, I know I'm frustrated with him finishing 7th in AL Rookie of the Year. I think I would still take Wyatt Langford over, is it blasphemous to say, literally every other rookie in Major League Baseball right now, just for the next 5 years? Maybe not, next year or 2 years, but from that first, pre-arb through the end of arbitration when he hits free agency. I'm not sure there's another rookie that's in the big leagues right now, or that was this season, that I would take the next 5 years over Wyatt Langford.
I don't think it's outrageous at all. I think you can have a really long and fun conversation in terms of the two young National League outfielders with Jackson Merrill and Jackson Chourio. I think, Merrill, you see what he can do in center field in the first year playing out there. I am also just always been obsessed with Jackson Merrill, and that was like one of my favorite picks to be the rookie of the year this year going into the season. And fortunately, Paul Skeens ended up having the best season ever. I think any other year, right? Jackson Merrill's running away with that thing. Chourio, with the defense that he plays on top of the speed and power combination, it is, very, very impressive at his age. But in terms of just what you're getting with Langford, in terms of the power potential, the feel to hit for a guy that is as strong and physical as he is, the approach being what it is, I don't think it's outrageous at all to say that. And I think it's a very fair argument and conversation. I've been kind of like trying to figure out how those guys stack up in my mind. Fortunately, we haven't done any of those rankings or anything yet for the Just Baseball show. I'm kind of dreading it because it's so difficult. But in terms of upside, it's hard to say that anybody has, any of these young guys have much more upside with the power and speed and hit combination that you get from a Wyatt Langford.
Speaking of guys with upside, we're getting into Just Baseball's top 15 Rangers prospects, including a teenage sensation that has upside out the wazoo. Right after this. The show is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just go to FanDuel.com to join today. They've got all kinds of different ways you can bet on sports, whether you want to bet on the NFL, whether you want to bet on the NBA, NHL. They still have some odds up for the World Series winner in 2025. So go check out all the action. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now, I'm here with Aram Layton, the head prospect man in charge, co-founder of Just Baseball, who wrote a top 15 Rangers prospect list. There are quite a few of those out there. I have not done mine for 2025 just yet, but when you unveiled yours, at the top of your list is a young teenage Bahamian sensation with an absolute cannon for an arm whose nickname is Bam Bam, Sebastian Walcott. I mean, what a freaking season for the teenager, ending up in AA. And I was going back and forth. I'm still going to be going back and forth until I eventually release my top 30 updated prospect rankings between Walcott and Kumar Rocker. And when you unveiled this list, I was a little surprised, mainly because the Rangers haven't developed a half decent pitching prospect in so long. And I was like, how could this guy not be #1? And I remember your answer. I don't know if it was pandering specifically, but it was exactly what I was looking to hear. You said, well, it's more about that I'm incredibly high on Sebastian Walcott than I am low on Kumar Rocker. And oh boy, I was like, you know how to play your audience, my friend.
No, so it's funny because, a lot of the time I am a little bit scared of the mob of people that don't love the rankings. Obviously, when it's you, I know it's fun conversation. But that genuinely was my takeaway there, where I mean, Rocker's a top 40 overall prospect for us, right? And is a guy that, I mean, in terms of what he did and just the picture that he looked like, I've talked about it when we did the episode breaking down the system, but like, this was the best version of Kumar Rocker we've ever seen. Even like when he was bursting onto the scene, throwing no hitters in college, and when he was a first round pick prospect out of high school that turned down the money, and like, he's throwing harder than ever. He's throwing more strikes than ever. His delivery is cleaner than ever, and the slider has just leveled up to a point where it's one of the best sliders that we saw in the minor leagues, and clearly is already ready to play at the big league level. But when you look at what Walcott is doing, and I always try to base it on like who do I want to have if I'm starting my franchise tomorrow? Like, prospect 1 should not be swapped for prospect 2 in terms of who I'm starting my franchise with, in terms of trade value. That's just mostly how I like to look at it. And for Walcott to do what he did at 18 years old, and still honestly be not even near tapping into his potential power-wise in game. This is just a guy that I think is on a different level. Like, has #1 prospect in baseball type of upside if he's in the minor leagues long enough to be able to do that. Like, everyone talks about, Ethan Salas, and I think he's a very, very good prospect as well in the Padres system, and how polished he is for a 17, now 18-year-old and everything like that. But also, you got to give him time because, even though he's really struggling in high A, he's a kid. And I understand catching is a much more encompassing job than shortstop and third, but like, he was playing a lot of shortstop and trying to prove that he could stick there. Walcott was, and like, Walcott was lighting it up in high A, right? Like, absolutely mashing the ball once he got his feet wet. And, we didn't even need to make an age-related excuse for him. Beyond that, like, he's popping exit velocities of 116 plus miles per hour. He still has more room for strength. You mentioned the arm. I do think he ends up moving to third, but that's fine. Like, I think there's legitimately 40 home run upside here. The patience and the approach got better and better and better. He continued to cut the chase rate down, and then to just get up to AA at the end of the year and look comfortable at 18 years old is just outrageous to me. So I think when you look at what he did age to level, what he already is capable of putting up in terms of the exit velocities, you look at the swing mechanics, and then you also look at the frame and how there's actually more room in there. It's kind of scary thinking about what he could actually turn into.
Yeah, I'm so incredibly high on this kid, and the fact that the Rangers, started him in high A. I mean, he got it was 4 games last year in Hickory, and not a whole lot. And then this year, I mean, just to stick him at high A from the jump as an 18-year-old, I thought, okay, there's still a lot of like rawness there. There's still a lot of swing and miss to his game. Still some room to grow of, pitch recognition and recognizing, quality breaking stuff. And I was like, this is going to be a huge challenge for him. And the first couple of weeks, he looked awful. He looked very overmatched. But I think the things that I've been hearing about the makeup of this kid is he's a guy who needs to be challenged. It's like, the kid that's, gifted and talented in, a class that's not easy for him. He's gonna, he's not gonna apply himself. He's not gonna be like, okay, well, I've figured this out. And I think we might have seen it a little bit in the end of the season. His numbers, weren't, I feel like he got to a level. He's like, okay, I'm ready for the next level. And then you see him get challenged again, going to Frisco, where he's 6.2 years younger than the average Texas League hitter at 18. I mean, it is just crazy. And he's going to be a teenager, the opening day shortstop for the AA Frisco Rough Riders. You know who the last 2 teenage shortstops to open as the AA opening day shortstops for the Frisco Rough Riders are?
Elvis Andrews.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know who the other would be.
Jerks and Profar.
Those
are the two. Those are the two he's earning comparisons to. And those are some very good comparisons for his age. But another guy who popped off on this list, I mean, this was a guy who was already on my radar. Not the guy we're about to talk about. Alejandro Rosario is a guy who was not on my radar at all. Was very confused by the draft pick. A 5th-round pick with a 7 ERA out of Miami. I'm like, Rangers, what are you thinking? And they're like, we're thinking this guy's pretty good. And I said, okay, Chris Young, I guess you were right.
He was right. and I mean, this is why I love doing the system by system. Like there's always going to be players that, even if you catch a start or two and you don't really appreciate the full scope of how good they are until you do the full dive and, write up the farm system. And, anytime I'm writing up a system, I want to watch at least 10 starts and video and dive into the data from the whole season, things like that. And Rosario, just the more I watched, the more enamored I continue to be by just the stuff that he possesses and the way that he works on the mound. They clearly saw a guy that was not tapping into nearly anything close to what he could be as a pitcher. He was a very intriguing high school, prospect and was a draft guy that ultimately went to Miami. So I think they kind of followed him through there, saw what he was doing in Miami or maybe not doing, and kind of had a plan right away to get him right. And, there was some mechanical things to just throw more strikes, work more downhill, work more linearly, figure that out, really helped the fastball. But then also leaning into the splitter more that he just wasn't throwing. And now he's throwing it and it's just absolutely disgusting. And I think working, straight towards home has also helped him directionally with his secondaries. But I mean, when you look at a guy here that I had no problem labeling 3+ pitches here, and then the command's gotten to the point where it's already big league average, could be above average. How do you poke a hole in this kid's arsenal? And it's 96 to 98. The release height slightly below average, so the ride really plays up. So he can really get back into counts just off the fastball. But he commanded the heck out of the slider and the changeup this past year too. So to see him healthy, to see him building up these innings, and to see what he did, I mean, this guy was the biggest climber, I think, in our top prospect list and on the top 100 side. And I mean, he's become one of my favorite arms to watch in the minor leagues.
Legitimately 2 top 100 Rangers pitching prospects that were very much not on 100 radar. I mean, this was just an incredible year for Rangers pitching development. A sentence I never thought I'd say with a straight face and things going actually this well, as opposed to just, oh, one guy was pretty good. I mean, this was an incredible season for Rangers pitching development. There's a couple lefties I want to get into, and I want to see what Arm's thoughts are on how the Rangers should configure their outfield next season. Right after this. Now I'm here with Aram Layton, baseball writer, co-founder of Just Baseball, the prospect prince, as I like to call him. And there are two lefties I want to talk to you about that had pretty darn good seasons for the Rangers in the minors this year. We have Mitch Bratt and Cole Drake, who, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe that Cole Drake might actually have been the Rangers minor league Tom Grieve pitcher of the year. Not Tom Grieve, Nolan Ryan pitcher of the year. Tom Grieve is the position player. Gosh, if Tom Grieve could also pitch, I mean, that man did everything for the Rangers. But Mitch Bratt versus Cole Drake. You guys have Mitch Bratt a little bit higher, actually, in your top 15. Cole Drake is on your guys to mention list. I saw a couple of starts from Bratt this year. Actually, one of them was a relief appearance of Jacob deGrom. Very fun to see him against AA hitters. Cole Drake, also fun to see against AA hitters at the end of this year. I'm curious what your thoughts are on those guys and why y'all leaned a little bit more towards Mitch Bratt on the higher side.
Yeah, it's a ceiling floor thing, and it's one that I kind of went back and forth on. Like if we're looking at the top 15, because we always do, as you mentioned, the top 15 and the names to watch. Like if there was a number 16, it was probably Cole Drake, and Bratt obviously checked in right there at 14. It's tough because when I look at a 6'5" lefty and Drake, that clearly the fastball just plays up. Like it looks like he's throwing a lot harder than he does. There was points where he was averaging 91 to 93, and it looked like it was getting on hitters a lot quicker. But then you look at some of the underlying stuff and the underlying data, and it's like, well, it gets below average extension, and there's good ride to the fastball. So I think that's why it looks like it's playing up. But I had a little bit of concern of how that may play against big league competition. Is he just going to be able to kind of live off of the ride there and building off of that? Like the fastball command was good. But then secondaries wise, I don't think he had a single secondary that he landed for a strike above a 60% clip. So I saw a little bit more reliever risk there. But the thing is if he's a reliever, like it could be the darn good one too with the fastball and breaking balls, the breaking ball combination that he has. Brad also just being 21 years old. That was an interesting wrinkle in it for me. And I think there's just a level of deception that Bratt generates that makes me feel confident that he's a high probability back end of the rotation starter. But he does leave a bit to be desired velocity wise. He averaged 91 miles per hour this year, but he also put up pretty comparable in zone whiff numbers. And that was what stood out to me too, is like he clearly creates a difficult angle, hides the ball well, and also gets pretty good ride from a slightly lower release height. So the characteristics are there. If he can find a tick or two, and I think it could be in there, considering it, there's a little bit more room for strength in his frame. He just turned 21 years old. I'm just banking on the development side of things a little bit more. And you're joking about, Rangers pitching development, not something that we've been able to say. I agree. Although you look top to bottom this year, there's clearly something going on here. Chris Young, I think that was probably one of the main priorities aside from signing Corey Seager and Marcus Semien, right? Was, to be able to overhaul the pitching development side of things. When he was able to inherit this organization and the situation here, and they clearly have. Like it's the identification, but you're seeing guys like Winston Santos who are stuck at the lower levels, making leaps and finding the slider that just seems to be working organizationally from top to bottom. So with Brad, I'm like, the slider took a step forward. He landed the fastball for a strike at a 72% clip and the slider for a strike at a 71% clip. He's still trying to find that third pitch, but I'm like, with the way that they're trending, he's 21 years old. The makeup's just plus. Like I'm betting on a little bit more development here, whereas Cole Drake seems a little bit closer to a finished product. But that said, that does give Drake a bit of value here, and that's a guy that could be helping the Rangers out of the pen or just in some capacity as soon as this coming season.
Oh, yeah, they could definitely use some help out of the pen, as they could use some help in figuring out what the heck they're going to do with their outfield. For me, I mean, it's one of the bigger questions of how they're going to go about building this roster in the offseason. I mean, they have a lot of bullpen guys that are free agents, but in terms of internally, there's a lot of pieces there. And I'm curious, if you were the Rangers GM, how would you want to go about putting together this outfield? Who's starting your everyday left fielder, center fielder, right fielder, DH? If you want to just go internal candidates, that's fine. If you say, oh, there's a free agent that I think would fit here perfectly, I think that's fine too. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on how the Rangers should configure that outfield and DH spot for next year? Because the infield's pretty locked down.
Yeah, I would say so. So my question to you would be, do you think that they're going to take on much more money going into, this offseason here with, the luxury tax and just also the RSN situation, like, because that will impact kind of the way I would probably, realistically approach it.
Yeah, I think they're going to take on their main goal is to stay under the luxury tax. So there's some money there if you can configure it. I think they're going to bring back Eovaldi as one of their top priorities. I think Sasaki is going to be a top priority. I think David Robertson's going to be too expensive to go get out there. I think they might sign one bat. That's my thought. It might, but I'm not even sure that they will. I would like Randall Grichuk or Jock Peterson. I think that worked perfectly here, but I think the money might be more allocated towards the pitching side of things.
So I really like the internal situation in terms of, like, you have Evan Carter, presumably healthy. We'll see, center field is very encompassing. Like, it is a lot, to take on out there. And guys always discuss kind of how exhausting it can be compared to playing a corner, just because you're running on essentially every single, ball that's hit out there. But, assuming that the bag and everything's okay, like, Carter can play a really solid center field. But you mentioned, like, I don't love Langford playing center field every single day, but for him to plug there to give, Carter some days off here and there. And then, you could start Leody Taveras and things like that as that fourth outfielder. I think you can put together a solid value in center field, presuming, Evan Carter is available and healthy. Like, that guy's got to be in the lineup every single day when he is. The big question, I guess, becomes, what do you do with Adolis Garcia? Because obviously Wyatt Langford has the other corner locked down. And I just think after such a frustrating year, you can't just fully sell low or give up or anything like that. You got to kind of hope that he bounces back, and he did still hit 25 home runs. But, with the defense really backing up, that was a big surprise to me. Like, I do wonder if, getting Adolis more into the DH spot would actually help him offensively. And then you go look for a corner outfielder there. That could be via trade. Like, all of a sudden, this Rangers team has a really ridiculous amount of pitching talent that they can move, right? Like, yeah, I know you don't want to, because it's like all of a sudden we have this, and, we also need relievers and things like that. But, you've got like the Winston Santoses of the world, guys like that are going to also clog a 40 spot, not for a little bit or pretty soon, that, I think a lot of teams would be happy to acquire and, an outfield deal. I think Grichuk makes all the sense in the world. Especially with like the way the left-handed, the lineup can get a little left-handed, but Grichuk also showed that he could hit righties all of a sudden a little bit more last year than we'd seen in the past. Where are you at with Nathaniel Lowe? Because that also impacts
I love Nathaniel Lowe. Absolutely love him.
You think he's guaranteed, like, Sharpied in for next year? They're going to roll.
Yeah, super Sharpied in there. I mean, yeah. I went through an episode, I think it was this week, maybe it was last week, about how, like, $10 million, like the sticker shock of like, oh my gosh, $10 million for a first baseman. We've been a 2.7 B-WAR guy in 4 years. Like, that's his average. It's 4 years. He won a Silver Slugger. I mean, that second half in 2022, he was legit unstoppable. Like, he's got that kind of offensive upside in him. The second half of 2023, he really fell off. I mean, his mom was going through, brain cancer treatment. Yeah. I mean, that's like, I can't even imagine the kind of things that he's dealing with there. And then this year, he had a slow start to the season, because this was the first time he was ever hurt. He had, I can't think of what's the abdominal oblique. That's the one.
Everyone's obliques were going, man.
Yeah, this is the first time he said he'd been hurt since, like, I don't know, junior high. Like, he had been healthy, like, all through high school, all through college, all through the minors, all through his major league career. This is the first time he had really dealt with that at all. And so And he came back. He still played 140 something games after missing a decent chunk of the games, 140 games exactly on the dot, and still had a 2.7 WAR season. Like, I think there's a lot in there, and I think the Rangers are going to need him to carry a little bit more of that offensive load, and just everyone just stink a little bit less next year. I feel like that's a fair ask.
Yeah, I love the idea of Grichuk, being that platoon type of piece there. I think Adolis needs to go to the DH spot because whatever it was, like, something at hitting 31 years old, he just looked like he hit the other side of 30. I know he's physical and still very powerful, but I think about Soler, and I think they're kind of similar, Jorge Soler and him, in terms of they're not the same player, but just kind of the way their bodies move and the way they produce at the plate, and I think the way that they could be affected by playing the outfield pretty consistently. And it just seemed like it wore on him. And I know he was hurt and he's dealt with that, but that also probably compounded it, getting hurt out there. So I think him in a DH role, he'd start to thrive a lot more. Like Marcelo Ozuna is another example of that too. Really just focus on the hitting side of things. And, certain games you got to plug him out there. That's fine. Grichuk will allow you to destroy lefties. And then, you could try Josh Smith out there, certain games. If you want to, if you don't want to always have Grichuk out there against a righty, you could always still go to Leote here and there. But it just seemed like there was too many ABs going to guys like Leote and it kind of expect. And I know that he had a great year in the World Series and winning year, but like at the end of the day, like I think it was kind of evident that it was maybe a bit of a fever dream. So I don't think they have to do anything crazy there, especially assuming that Adolis picks up a little bit more in a DH spot. You can kind of platoon your way in that other corner. And, I would explore trades, but again, you don't want to just make one to make it. But I do think there's still a lot of teams that, even though he's been disappointing, that would love to take a chance on Ezekiel Duran, like second division teams that would probably want to play him regularly, things like that. But I really would go lower cost, piece it together. And, if you shelter Josh Smith from lefties and you put Grichuk in a spot where he can really succeed a lot, I think you could put together quite a nice productive, left field. Or I just assume you probably want to move that over to left, and then maybe Langford can play right.
Yeah, I think so. I think Langford's got the arm for right. And Adolis, I mean, he is a physical guy, and so it takes a toll. I mean, towards the end of his rookie season, it was the first time of him playing that many games. He really, really wore down. And so he was a guy who got a lot of games off. And then, in 2023, really didn't have a lot of games off and was able to sustain that. Had a little bit of an injury in August or something, I think September, then came back and made it through that long World Series run. This year was just a tough toll bouncing back from that World Series hangover, but a lot of reasons for excitement, a lot of upside on the farm in the big league level, a lot of reason for hope that this team hopefully won't have another repeat of 2024, and their 2025 will maybe be a little bit of odd year magic from Bruce Bochy. But hey, having you on anytime is some even odd year, whatever year magic. Aram Leighton, go read all his work at justbaseball.com. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend.
Thanks for having me on. Always a blast.
Always a blast indeed. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.